Welcome to Changelog and Friends, a weekly talk show about Citrix thin clients. Big thanks to our partners at Fly.io, the home of Changelog.com. Over 3 million apps have launched on Fly. You can too. Learn more at Fly.io. Okay, let's talk.
Hey friends, I'm here with a new friend of mine, Shane Harder, the founder of Crowdster. Check them out, crowdster.io. They let you keep tabs on your cron jobs, Linux, Kubernetes, Apache Airflow, Sidekick, and more. With over 12 open source integrations, you can instrument all your jobs no matter where you're running them. So Shane, for me, I'm using Linux, and Linux cron jobs are by far the most popular in my opinion, right? But there's so many other cron-like things, Kubernetes, Airflow, Sidekick. Help me understand the full spectrum of background jobs and cron jobs beyond Linux cron.
Yeah, Linux cron jobs are massively popular. They are still, 40 years later, the tool that most developers will go to first when they need to start scheduling something in the background. But when you get into a team environment or an enterprise environment, there is a lot of other constraints at play, and there's other considerations. And whether it's simply like redundancy that you're not going to get from cron tab itself, or more like complex orchestration stories like you can get with like Airflow, we see companies eventually outgrowing cron. And what we wanted to be sure of is that, first of all, like migrating from cron to anything else is a complicated thing. So we wanted to give you tools to help you monitor that transition and make sure your jobs are working good as you do that migration. And then second, we wanted to give you a way to unify all these different job platforms, because seldom do you have just like platform A and you migrate cleanly to platform B. Probably in a real world scenario, you're running both side by side for a while. You don't want to have different monitoring tools or different monitoring strategies for every different platform that you deploy. So our goal is anywhere you're running a background job, you can use Crowdster. The number one way that we ensured that was possible is by having like a really simple API that you can just use with an HTTP request yourself, which is pretty abnormal for monitoring tools, but that works in a lot of cases. But to make it easier then, every popular job platform out there, like Linux cron jobs, Kubernetes cron jobs, Windows, Sidekick, Airflow, you name it, we have a Crowdster SDK that you can install that will run automatically, configure your monitoring, run in the background, and sync all your jobs with Crowdster the same way your Linux cron jobs will be synced.
Okay, friends, join more than 50,000 developers using Crowdster. I'm one of them. You can start for free, and they have a pay-as-you-grow pricing plan. Setup is too easy with more than 20 SDKs. Check them out at crowdster.io. That's cronitor.io. Again, crowdster.io. Well, friends, we're here to discuss an outage, a disaster that made history. And we have a good friend of ours here, Robert Ross, the founder and CEO of FireHydrant, to help us dig into what exactly happened and maybe more pertinently, how to prevent incidents at large or just deal with them. What do you think, Robert?
Well, I'll do my best without wearing a monocle and thinking about exactly how this went down. But yeah, no, I can. I've read every news source about it, I think, at this point. And
okay.
I think everyone's heard about it. So excited to dive in.
What are you guys talking about? I'm not even sure what we're referring to here.
Yeah, right, Jared.
Did something happen?
You know what I kept thinking every time I read CrowdStrike? I kept thinking of AC/DC's Thunderstruck. I couldn't quite pull the pun across, because it's CrowdStrike, Thunderstruck, but that song has been playing in my head. Probably before this happened, but it just happened to align. I don't know. I'm an AC/DC fan. What can I say?
The developer may have been listening to that when they wrote the code.
They might have been.
That could be why you're there.
Potentially. I like to code to some AC/DC.
Yeah, for sure. Especially that song. That'll pump you up, man.
For sure.
I code faster when that type of music is playing, that's for sure.
I'm sure most folks are to some degree primed on what happened, but who wants to nominate themselves to explain at least a primer of what happened? I think you did it pretty well in news, Jared, but you also covered some other sides of it too. But
yeah,
what do you think? You want to handle it or you want me to handle it?
Well, there was a giant outage on Friday due to CrowdStrike pushing a bad update to a billion machines. I'm not sure the exact number, but basically every Windows-based company, organization around the world was affected probably somehow. Many things were down. The banking industry got hit hard. Hospitals got hit hard. Airlines got hit hard, except for Southwest, which I discussed in news.
Mm-hmm.
The reasoning, by the way, quick update on that, I put in news, was that they are allegedly still running old versions of Windows 95 3.1. Could be true. Might not be true. Those are actually rumors.
I thought that was a joke when I saw that. Maybe that's true, actually.
It kind of was.
It duped Jared. It got him.
It might be fake news. I updated our changelog newsletter to make sure that it's accurate now, because I thought it was funny too, which is why I put it in there. And it's true that Southwest was unaffected. And of course, Southwest famously was down, was it 2 years ago, for 10 days?
Yeah.
Because they couldn't.
The holiday outage.
Yeah, the holiday outage. Yep. And back then there was reasonings because they were on really old versions of Windows and they couldn't do stuff. And so I think those two stories combined to say perhaps their old versions of Windows have actually saved them this time. But allegedly, not necessarily the case, but funny either way. Yeah, man. I guess the way I would summarize it is the blue screen of death made an epic comeback and took over the world. Total world domination last week.
Wouldn't you say that this is affected by CrowdStrike customers, not just simply Windows users?
Yeah, but I guess here's what's weird about it. I had never even heard of CrowdStrike, but it sounds like who's not a CrowdStrike customer. Robert, were you familiar with CrowdStrike prior to this?
Yeah, we used CrowdStrike.
Okay.
At Fire Hydrant, yep.
Okay. So what do you use them for?
Endpoint security. I mean, we run their Falcon daemon on all of the employee laptops. We don't use it for like the services we provide. But it is running on every Fire Hydrant laptop.
Gotcha. And these laptops are Windows, Linux, Mac OS?
All Mac, yeah. So we weren't impacted by it, thankfully.
It's just the Windows CrowdStrike world.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And it seems like there was a change that was in the new sensor that runs, silently. I think a lot of people don't even know that they have CrowdStrike on their laptop. And that's by design, right? That's I would say a good product. You don't even know it's there until it gives you a blue screen of death. But
it's a bad way to find out about it, but
right.
Before then,
it's like
brilliant.
It's like, you had a bunch of stuff in your walls and then eventually it falls out of the wall and you're like, oh, that's been rotting, behind there for a long time. I think that the change is always the biggest cause of incidents. I mean, we see it all the time. Google even has a stat that 80% of their incidents are caused by a change. So it's not exactly shocking that a change caused this. I think what's shocking to people is the scale of the incident. And when you were, you had AC/DC Thunderstruck playing in your head, I kind of had like Jeff Goldblum in my head where he's like, you flap your wings and like a hurricane happens, across the ocean.
Right.
Like, that's kind of what it felt like.
The butterfly effect.
Yeah, the butterfly effect. Exactly. That's kind of what it felt to me. A very simple try to access memory that wasn't there. Grounded flights, still has grounded flights. Delta has canceled hundreds of flights every single day for the last 5 days. And it's, I think we're just going to keep hearing about problems for the next few weeks from this thing.
Yeah, it would be interesting if somebody could somehow, some way come up with like a global economic impact of this event, but it has to be measured in billions, maybe trillions of dollars.
I think so. I mean, we had employees and teammates at Fire Hydrant that had to cancel trips. I had friends that were at the airport that had to cancel their weekend plans that they were flying somewhere. So it wasn't only the places like airports and hospitals that were impacted. It was local economies that were impacted by this as well. Friends going to Dominican Republic that couldn't go. And it's hard to reschedule those types of plans. So it's kind of like, probably not coming back, that loss.
That money, yeah. Well, not to mention just labor, pure labor costs of mitigation or remediation. Because this, unfortunately, does require, I think, direct impact with each machine affected, meaning you can't just remotely reboot these machines, is what I read. You have to actually go touch each machine. and I don't know, boot in a safe mode, or maybe Robert or Adam, exactly the process, but it's relatively straightforward. Unless you have an encrypted hard drive, then it's slightly less straightforward. But we're talking about people walking around data centers, going to each computer, or walking around hospitals, going to each computer. I mean, the amount of highly paid individuals effectively doing a mass reboot this week is probably measured in large numbers.
Yeah. And even like parts of the country in the US that had issues probably don't have, a big workforce capable of doing this work. You think of a giant airline, they have a massive IT team that can go and do that labor and that work. But Alaska, in rural Alaska, 911 wasn't working. People couldn't call 911.
Really?
And at one point, even Portland's mayor declared a state of emergency on Friday. And there's parts of the impact area that just don't have like a response unit that can go solve those problems. So I do think we're going to keep hearing about it. There's going to be inquiries by the government. I think I saw today that CrowdStrike CEO is going to be called upon by Congress.
Yep. That was like news of like 16 hours ago or so. AP had that out there. The Washington Post had it out there.
Yeah.
House committee calls on CrowdStrike CEO to testify on the global outage.
And not surprising. And he went on air pretty quickly and was like, this is our fault. We're fixing it. And I have to commend the confidence to just go and own it that quickly. But, I have questions. I think everyone does. Even my aunts and uncles in their late 60s who don't quite understand this type of world like we all do were asking me questions. I mean, everyone felt this, I think, in some way, shape, or form.
Well, Windows only. There's a lot of details. So I caught up with Dave Plummer. That's literally his name. He is on YouTube. He runs a channel called Dave's Garage. He's from what I understand, an ex-Microsoft operating system developer. And so he knows a lot about this stuff. And I will link it in the show notes. But I mean, he was my source of like literally what really happened on the inside. There's also the code report from, I think it's Fireside or Fire something on Fireship on YouTube that also summarize some things that I pay attention to as well as part of like researching this topic. So there's some theories that this is just simply bad quality code. This could be sabotage, or this could be planned. Now, those are obviously theories, not truth at this point. But I think it's important to look at, Robbie, you said change is what affects things and what causes incidents. We're not sure when exactly this code got pushed, but what happened was, or at least from my understanding, and thanks to Dave for explaining this, is that this software, Falcon, as you all run as well, it runs in what they call kernel mode. And stop me if you've heard this one before, but there's two lanes to live in, basically in the operating world. You've got user mode and you got kernel mode. And kernel mode has, higher priority. And when an application crashes in kernel mode, it crashes the system, and it does it by design because it's protecting the system. It's better to crash than to actually boot up. Something else worse could happen if that was the case. And CrowdStrike, their software called Falcon, lives and runs in kernel mode. And that's, I guess, by design. I'm not sure why it has to. And then there's this labs that Microsoft has called Windows Hardware Quality Labs, that drivers that live in kernel mode or run in kernel mode that are third party, they have to go through this process to get deployed. And so it gets tested by Microsoft through this WHQL labs system to be able to be deployed. It gets signed and used by the operating system, etc. But the way they bypass this was because, in Dave's words, they want to be agile, ambitious, and aggressive to get the latest protection. And so as a way to deploy this latest protection more fastly to Windows users, and I guess it's not the case for Mac or other systems because it didn't happen to you all, Robert, is that they have these things called definition files that the kernel reads from. So when the kernel wakes up, if it's a new boot, it wakes up, it enumerates a folder, and looks for this other code, this dynamic code that gets deployed outside the kernel delivery system. So essentially you have unsigned code that runs in kernel mode. That's bad stuff from what I understand, thanks to Dave, that's a rough version of the mechanics of how this works on the Windows system.
Yeah, I think it's a game of trade-offs, and that's a hard thing to feel now, right? Like people's flights got canceled, hospital surgeries got canceled. Like, it's a big deal. But at the end of the day, it's easy to say this was the worst thing that could happen instead of the sum of the parts of all the things that were maybe prevented in the past. And we just have no idea. I don't even think that CrowdStrike would probably know. But how many things were via CrowdStrike or another, locking system, security system running, have prevented mass credit card theft or identity theft or other things going on? It's hard to say. No one's going to buy that now, though. The trade, because no one's going to look at a trade-off right now. They're going to be like, my flight got canceled. I don't care what my trade-offs were in the past right now. The other thing that I think that is going to be, we're just going to have to see if CrowdStrike posts a public retrospective. But this code could have been this code that is, the crime scene of this code base, that could be in there. We don't know, for 10 years. We have no idea.
True.
And another piece of code was deployed 10 miles away, or so they thought, from that code base or that line of code calling that memory address. And then that caused it, right? I think it's one of the challenges with building software now is, like we were kind of saying earlier, the butterfly effect. Like, software is so complex now and so vast that you can deploy a change in what you think is a different country of your code base, but it impacts across the ocean and somewhere else. And I would wager that's what happened here. I would wager. There's just no way that CrowdStrike doesn't have a crazy test suite. That Microsoft is probably running tests for them because it does run in kernel mode. They have to get that approval, it sounds like. I just have a really hard time believing that this very simple line of code just got deployed and took everything down. I could be totally wrong and totally off base. I have no idea. But whenever I've taken down production, and it's been many times, it wasn't explicitly because the one piece of code that I wrote, because I tested that. I put that through its paces. I wrote unit tests. It was the combination of that and something else. Like, when you add chlorine and vinegar, what's that potent combination they say never to do because it's super toxic all of a sudden? That's what it feels like happened to me in this outage specifically.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it seems like some of our most ingrained premonitions coming to fruition in terms of, being down in the mucky muck as a developer. We just know, and I've said many times, it just feels like we're building a house of cards, because it's so complicated and it's so intertwined. And I mean, it's effectively, especially with web development, we're talking about a worldwide distributed system, which has things that happen. I mean, of course, there's an explanation in retrospect for all of these things, but when you build a house of cards, eventually it's going to just topple. And sometimes it topples in ways that you don't know why or when or how and what will be the downstream effects. And of course, this isn't web development in this case. This is operating system code, but still network to machines, being able to remotely update, every once in a while, just the house of cards topples and we have to start over to a certain extent, rethink things, try to adjust and clean up the mess and move forward.
I mean, I even think of it for every person listening to this, think about the mechanics of what is going on as you're listening to this podcast. If you're using headphones right now, your headphones have software in them that is going to a Bluetooth chip that has software on it. That's part of an operating system. That's translating that to go over the air to a cell phone tower that's running software. That's going to a network switch that Cisco probably built. That's running software. And it just goes more, and then eventually hits an Apple Music server or some app Spotify server that goes through a CDN. That's software. It's just software all the way down. I mean, it is thousands of touch points of software for you to hear this stupid analogy that I'm making. That's like that. And you had to go through that grueling exercise through that much software. And that's just the world now. That's the way it is. It's not going back. We can't unwind this anytime soon.
Right. That's why I said sometimes you just have to clean up the mess and then obviously do a retrospective. And one thing we can do is make sure that particular thing doesn't happen ever again, but that's just one of the things. That's what regression tests are for. Like, I'm not going to let this particular bug bite me and my billion customers again. And I'm sure CrowdStrike, after they go through the PR process, I mean, not pull requests, but like public relations, because I mean, their stock was down 23%, I think they have. I mean, they are massively hurt by this. Their reputation is just in the mud.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to go through all that, and maybe there'll be people fired. Who knows what's going to happen? But then hopefully they sit down and say, okay, let's do our analysis. Let's do our postmortem. Let's figure out how we can make this particular aspect of our business not hurt people again. But that's just one thing. That's similar. It goes back to the conversation of information security that we're having with Jacob DePriest from GitHub's security team. The challenge of the defender is you have to defend the entire system, and the attacker only has to find one hole.
Mm-hmm.
Bugs work the same way, only it's just accidental and not malicious, And so in that conversation, I said, I feel like to a certain extent, resistance is futile. I mean, the defender does all they can, but you're still going to have the attacker succeed sometimes. And it seems like with software systems, the bugs are going to be there. I mean, we haven't found a way of eliminating all bugs. And so how do we build around, fortify, defense in depth, react, respond? I don't know. I think in one case, this is an advertisement for heterogeneous systems. What's the word? Not a monoculture. Just like in biological systems, right? Like you want to have...
Yeah, regenerative farming where you have, you plant two crops in the same plot of land and they help each other.
Yeah, exactly. Just diversity inside of our software systems so that when we have a problem in one particular system, aka Windows machines running CrowdStrike, that's not a worldwide global outage. That's like a regional, 20% of the internet was down today, guys, versus what it actually, like that whole, let's have multiple operating systems extant, not just worldwide, but even in our own organizations, which can be a huge burden, a huge pain. And we tend to want to normalize and streamline and formalize a specific stack of software because it's easier to maintain and manage. But then you just are vulnerable to attacks at like a 100% scale of your organization. So, I mean, I think one takeaway we can have is like, hey, I'm really happy I'm running Mac OS today. Now, maybe tomorrow, all the Windows users will be happy that they're running Windows and not Mac OS because something will attack Mac OS. But the Linux users are having the best time of their life right now.
Oh yeah, the memes are strong right now.
Well, it is the year of the Linux desktop, as you know, Jared.
It might be.
I've heard that the last 15 years of my life, and it has not come to fruition.
Here's the through line to all this, though. The through line is massively deployed software. That's it. Or massively dependent upon software in a different scenario, like a dependency. Well, it's that this was everywhere, right? It's that this was everywhere. And then I think there's, very specifically to this scenario, there are some layers that may have been not thought so well through. Like literally, if Dave from Dave's Garage, Dave Plummer, is accurate in his description of how they bypassed the WHQL, which is a hardware labs quality system that is there to sign these drivers to run in kernel mode. Because it's so, like what runs in kernel mode is so limited because of its power. And here they are able to run there, which is, okay, fine. If you have to, then, and Windows and that team blesses you and they put you in the WHQL system to have this signed certificate to say, okay, your driver is blessed. We've tested it to the absolute best of our knowledge. We put it through all the paces. But then to be able to have a separate folder that you can deploy to at scale, and the driver essentially is an engine that runs code that has not been signed or not gone through these paces. That alone there is like, I'd imagine, Robert, as you look at what you do and how you help folks look at incidents, is like, when we look at what we've done here, we have to examine the system we built. Maybe it's, anti the Windows way to have this sidecar, this folder of definitions that the driver enumerates over and sucks in, and the driver essentially is an engine that runs unsigned code. That could be true if Dave's accurate. And if that is true, wow, how did that happen? Is that, in quotes, legal? Not so much in the true legal sense, but like by the relationship formed between CrowdStrike, the Falcon software, and the Windows team that has WHQL to allow this to live in kernel land and not user land.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And then you got just the ability to deploy at scale and for the system to do what it should have done. So, when an app crashes. When the kernel mode crashes, the system crashes, and it crashes because it has to. Like, this is it did what it should have done. There was a bug in the kernel driver that when it booted up, it didn't, for whatever reason, cause an exception at the kernel level. And when the kernel crashes, the whole system crashes, and that's by design. So effectively, it was preventative on purpose, but by a bug or a faulty code.
Yeah. I think as software engineers, and I feel qualified to say this because it is a criticism, is that we love thinking that we, have invented new things. And every once in a while, you just kind of have to take a step back and think of, oh, actually, we've gone through all of this process without software. We've already done it. And the example I use all the time is like buildings and building codes and structures. And when was the last time you heard of a building catching on fire? I live in New York City. There's a lot of opportunities for buildings to catch on fire. And it does happen. It does happen. But not nearly at the rate that it used to happen. If you think about the London fire, if you think about the San Francisco fire, like all of these events that occurred really just triggered new ways of thinking because of a catastrophe. And this will do the same thing. We've been perfectly fine for however long this sidecar technology has been running in production. We've been perfectly fine with that. And then now we're not, right? Or maybe now we're not. The same thing has happened. I mean, we have sprinklers in our buildings because of fires. We didn't put sprinklers there as a preventative measure. Like, we had to have a lot of fires before we said, maybe we should have sprinklers in buildings, or maybe we should put concrete as the center of the building so it doesn't fall when it becomes structurally unsound. And because of the hundreds of years that we've had of retrospectives and all of these learnings from these types of things, we have safe buildings now. Same things with cars. You were saying the kernel panic is a preventative measure. Cars have the same thing. They have crinkle zones to protect the driver. It's designed to collapse in certain ways. And we're getting to that point with software more and more. I think the challenge we have for software is it's much easier to do new things with software than it is to do new things with cars. I can go write a crazy random piece of code and put it in production today. To all the fire hydrant customers, I swear I won't do that. But like, I could do that. And it would cost nothing. There'd be no labor virtually. But with these other systems, like, it's expensive to do new things like that. So the problem, I think, is we're kind of getting ahead of our skis now with software. Like, it's happening more and more and more that we're hearing about these global outages because the system is changing constantly. And we're introducing change at the fastest, most rapid rate that we possibly could do it. Like you were saying, it's a bit of a house of cards. Like, this is probably just the beginning. Like, we're probably going to have another massive outage before we really start to learn, oh, maybe we should scale back how much we're actually changing these really complicated systems.
Yeah, and the technical details of that hypothetical future outage could be wildly different than this. And so, whereas maybe you can say, well, what was the cause of the fire? Well, it was a gas leak. Well, it was a person who was doing something. There's these different reasons, but they're all kind of like, something combusted where it shouldn't have, and we didn't have preventative measures in place. With software, so much of it's wildly different. I think it could be very hard. Now, we have had some motion in the direction of, I think it was the United States White House recently promoted memory safe languages, for instance, Rust being, I think, named perhaps, but definitely the Rust stations were very excited about that particular note.
Yep.
So we have kind of nudges happening by governments. I know the EU is what I would call more heavy-handed with their regulation around the things you can and cannot do with software. But gosh, it just seems like because of the diversity in software systems, you can't just put fire suppression in the building and be done. Like there's going to be like so many different things, I think, so many different regulations and rules and details in order to actually harness up some sort of protection that would be effective against like an 80% solution even.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's a crazy thought, and I really hope we don't end up in this world. But buildings have regulated materials that they can be built in now. And you can't even, like children's toys can't have certain chemicals in them. Like these are all very regulated industries. And, could software eventually get to that point where governments are like, you can't use any memory unsafe language. It has to be, blessed by the US government if it's being used for public distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Could we get there? I don't know. Maybe. We've gotten there in almost everything else. People that have like cabins in the woods have regulations that they still have to abide by. So I don't know. It's a wild thought. I've never really had it until you started saying that, Trent.
Well, what you're saying though is we get to the future innovations through past failure and retrospectives and learning. That's how we get to the future, is deploying what we think is the best solution, it not being the best solution. There's some sort of catastrophe on a small or large scale. We examine that. We retrospective. We policy. We regulate. We redeploy. And we try again.
Well, the only other answer is to predict the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's to some degree what developers they're trying to do. They're at least tasked with trying to solve the present problem that is future-proof, that has a version of future-proof in it. I mean, you hear that all the time, right? This is future-proof code.
I've never said that about my code.
Maybe not, but somebody's like, this will future-proof us.
I have.
Yeah, somebody's definitely said that.
And I have always regretted it.
Yeah. Say feature-proof, maybe. My code's feature-proof. Yeah, not future-proof.
Yeah.
Feature-free.
What's up, friends? I'm here in the breaks with David Shu, founder and CEO of Retool. So, David, Retool has definitely cornered the market on internal tool software development. But zoom out for me. What's the big idea? Why did you start Retool? What is the big idea with internal software?
Yeah, so Retool started at this point 7 years ago. And when we started Retool, the core idea was that internal software is a giant category that no one really thinks about. And what's surprising to most people is that internal software represents something like 50 to 60% of all the code written in the world, which might sound pretty surprising. But if you think about it, most of us in Silicon Valley, we work at software companies, whether it's like a Airbnb, a Google, a Meta. These are all companies that are software companies selling software. And so most engineers at these companies are working on external-facing software. But if you think about it, most software engineers in the world actually don't work at these software companies. There's not that many of them. There's maybe 10, 20 of them, big ones at least. Most of the companies in the world are actually non-software companies. So if you think about a company like an LVMH, for example, or like a Coca-Cola, for example, or like a Zara. Zara's not selling any software, but they actually have a lot of software engineers, actually. And all their software engineers, all they do day in and day out is basically build internal software. So that's, I think, one reason we started Retool. The second reason we started Retool is if you look at all this internal software that people are building, it is remarkably similar. So if you take a look at, like a Zara, for example, versus Coca-Cola, two very different companies, obviously. One a clothing company, one a beverage company. But if you actually look at the software they're building internally to go run their operations, it is remarkably similar. It's basically forms, buttons, tables, all these sort of pretty common building blocks, basically, that come together in different ways. But then if you think about, not just the UI, but also what's the logic behind a lot of this stuff, they're pretty much just hitting API endpoints, hitting databases. You care about authentication, you care about authorization. These are sort of a lot of common building blocks, if you will, to internal tools. And so for us, the insight was, wow, internal software is a ginormous category, and it's all so similar, and developers hate building it. And so could we create a sort of higher level framework, if you will, for building all this software? And that would be really cool.
That will be really cool. Okay. So listeners, Retool is built for everyone, built for enterprise, built for scale, built for developers, and that's you. And if you found yourself nodding your head to what David was saying, then check out Retool at retool.com/changelog. It's the fastest way to build internal software. Do yourself a favor, get a demo or start for free today. Again, retool.com/changelog. I really come back to this at scale situation. I think, when we have the larger catastrophes, outages, etc., it's because of widely deployed code, which is a great thing because that code is somehow widely useful. But then you've got to have certain things in place that once you're maybe at that level, certain things that have to take place to instantiate change. Because like you said earlier, Robert, it's usually change and not so much that specific change. It's that change plus something else that's the unintended consequence of those two together. And I did look up, by the way, just because I was like, what actually happens when you combine chlorine bleach with vinegar? Well, it produces chlorine gas, which is highly toxic. So don't do that. And the reaction is just
I couldn't remember.
Not good at all.
Maybe bad. Yeah.
It's not good at all. I mean, it will damage your eyes, your respiratory system, like your breathing.
Right.
It's just not good at all. So never.
But we learned that the hard way, Somebody learned that.
did it.
Yeah, see, exactly. But now we know. Someone did it.
I like noticing obscure signs in public places because they're always indicative of some sort of incident.
Every sign has a story. Yeah.
I remember I was at a hotel one time and I was hanging out in the pool or maybe the hot tub. And there's a sign that said, "This pool is not for defecation purposes." Yeah, which was a very strange sign. And that might not be verbatim. And I can't remember if it's a defecation or really, it was very formal though. So I probably did say that. And I thought, yeah, somebody pooped in this pool at one point. And there was an incident where they said, we got to put a sign up.
Or someone watched Caddyshack and was just terrified.
Just baby roots. Yeah. So yeah, we learn from the hard way most of the time.
Yeah.
Because we can't predict what will happen when we combine those two elements until somebody does it.
And sometimes what happens is we go too far, honestly. We, governments, teams, whatever it is, the reaction can almost be too much. And I really do hope that, this is such a big outage that governments are getting involved, that I really hope there's some restraint in what comes out of this. I do, because I can see a world where it does get more restrictive in the next few years because of this. Like a good example is like the TSA, the horrible tragic event, 9/11. But the TSA has been proven time and time again that it's security theater, and we spend billions upon billions of dollars on it every single year. And I think that's an example of we overdid it. We went too far, reactionary. I don't think TSA should be gone entirely. I think that, there is purpose to it, but there are plenty of examples of things in the world that we just go too far. For example, moratoriums in code. It's pretty often that you have a couple incidents in a row, and then what happens? Everyone says, don't deploy anymore. Stop deploying. And then you realize that you have a memory leak and your system dies anyways because you're not deploying and not restarting that process, and it dies anyways. So, I just hope that we don't go too far with this, that we don't, overreact to this massive outage. I want an appropriate reaction to it.
Right.
Just to add some layers to this and going back to something you said, Jared, and it's kind of a sidetrack, but I got the information now. I texted my friend. So I had lunch with a friend of mine yesterday. I won't say where they work, but they work at a bank. And he said they were down for 4 hours, which I think is a short time frame compared to other scenarios we heard of. I don't know if that was literally only exactly 4 hours, or some coworkers were only down for 4 hours, or the specifics, but let's just say at least a day, right? This is a 10,000 plus organization when it comes to having laptops and distributed employees and branches and, regional HQs and state HQs, whatever, all these things, right? So at least a day, and those who did not have their laptop booted down and have to boot up were safe because there was no reboot required. But for those, Jared, you would love this because of your freaking multi-year streak, or what was the number of years for your laptop? I was listening back to our podcast recently, and I can't remember which one. But
Yeah, my very first MacBook Pro
Yes.
laptop, I didn't reboot it for over a year. I just was trying to see how long it could go.
Oh, did you do like uptime and terminal and?
Yep, uptime. Well, I had also iStat menus. We'll show that to you, which I've used for many
nice.
years. So it's very
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
And then I would just close it and open it, and I refused to reboot it because I just wanted to see how long. I called it a server.
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
and you'd have been safe. So the people that had your ambitions, I suppose, on boot time, were safe. But for those who booted down and booted back up the next day, which is a large majority of the people, right? They had that issue, and they were told to reboot and see if it fixed it. Obviously, it didn't. And that if that didn't work, they literally had to go to the localist IT center for them to have a person, like you had said, Jared, touch the machine, do something to it, and then it was,
Nick Burns.
good to go again, But could you imagine the cost of that enumerated across all the scenarios across the entire globe that was affected by this? Like, was it 8.5 million Windows computers were actually affected in a single day, where there was a larger deployment, but 8.5 million, I think, is the current number, if it's accurate.
That's it.
I think that was just one section of it, wasn't it?
Well, I think that was the crash. Like, there was like that many Windows computers that crashed. I don't know if that's the only computers that were affected necessarily, but those are the ones that were like in the critical sphere of should be up but not up.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, and one of those servers was a SQL Server 2000 that
Right, or IIS.
500 other servers were connecting to.
Right. Yeah, the cascading failure
Yeah.
is massive. I just feel like Nick Burns had his best day of work ever. Do you guys remember Nick Burns from Saturday Night Live?
Mm-mm.
This is your company's
Your company's computer guy.
computer guy.
Nick, the computer guy. He'll fix your computer, then he's gonna make fun of you. 'Cause he's Nick Burns, your company's computer guy.
Yeah, it's a Jimmy Fallon character. It was one of his better characters. Not a huge Fallon fan myself, but this was a good one where he was like just the most obnoxious computer guy stereotype ever. And nobody wanted to go ask him for help because he was going to just denigrate them, And I think his catchline was like, move.
Move! Was that so hard?
So I think Nick Burns had a great day, He gets to go around to everybody's computer and get out of the way. I'm going to reboot this thing.
Yeah. The heroes, honestly. I mean, the amount of patience that you would have to have on that day, Saturday, Sunday, today. Yes.
Oh, gosh.
Oh my gosh. Could you imagine just booting everything into safe mode and I just couldn't even.
And just to have a list of like hundreds of computers you're going to have to do next. You're like, all right, just one by one. Bam, bam.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's true. It was a Friday event that happened over the weekend. I mean, not even just those affected by obviously the downtime and their travel and their plans or their work. It's now like, wow, like IT has a big job to do. I was just watching like the first few 30 seconds of one. I'll link it up in the show notes. Nick Burns, your computer guy, or your company's computer guy. He's like, something about a virus and it's not going to be able to reboot. Like, he just almost described what happened. You've got to go in and fix it. So I'll drop that in the notes, or maybe even the audio. We'll see.
I mean, it's this outage, this CrowdStrike outage really hit every trope. It really did. Deployed on a Friday.
Right.
Global outage.
Windows. Yeah. I mean, the whole, it brought in the operating system wars.
It really hit so many checkboxes.
Memory on safety. Of course, there was a lot of C++ versus Rust conversations.
Yeah, I saw a lot of flaming of C++, and that's how kind of irks me because I'm like, I don't know, the stuff that you probably tweeted this tweet from is probably running C++ in some way, shape, or form.
Certainly somewhere in the stack, yes.
Right? I can even think of it. Like, I think that Twitter X runs Envoy, which is written in C++. So,
right.
I don't know. This stuff.
I was thinking about this actually from an incident standpoint. And Robert, you know a thing or two about incidents, right? You know one or two things about them at least?
Yeah, I think so.
Would you think so?
I mean,
Okay.
test me out here.
Just checking. It's like, so specifically to my friend in the bank situation, their team had to raise an incident company-wide that wasn't even their fault. It wasn't like their IT department messed up. So can you describe what you hypothesize for how the incident in a well-managed IT/technology stack organization would and should react when it's not even their problem? Like, it's their problem, obviously, but they didn't do it. And the fix is not clear because it's upstream. How do you think this percolated inside? What's your hypothesis?
So it's a good question. I mean, for an incident like this, like you're saying, it's not, it's on the outside of your controlled world. It's challenging. So your job at that point for whatever these teams, the banks, the call centers, all these places that were down because of this outage, the first job is going to be containment and workarounds. You're going to try to find a workaround as fast as humanly possible. And those teams are what they're going to do is they're going to work within their controlled world. So an IT team at a bank probably is going to tell everyone at the bank impacted, own the communications, like it's not a bug that we're causing. Here's the news. I'm sure everyone probably knew at that point. Here's what you can do to try to fix it, right? Here's how you boot into safe mode. Here's how you do X. And the incident responders at that point, they're just going to be trying to create a perimeter where it doesn't get worse and they can do things a little bit better. A good example is like if you think of a wildfire, there are firefighters that are fighting the fire. That's CrowdStrike. And then there are firefighters down, or rather up the hill, chopping down brush, cutting down trees, like trying to stop it from going any further. That's kind of what those teams are going to go. That's the mode that they're going to go into. I can't say for sure, but like that's in the situations I've had a vendor outage. That's the first thing we do is we try to look for another route. This happened recently. I mean, we actually, our CDN provider, incidents are natural, so I won't name them. It's not blaming them, but they had a incident like a week and a half ago, only impacted Newark, pretty small. And we can't control that. And we had to own that. And we had an incident opened internally because all of the East Coast users were going through this point of presence and they were getting 502s. So what we did is we actually just rerouted traffic. We just took our CDN out of the loop. And, that's how we got around it. That was the only thing we could do. And I think teams are going to have to start thinking about these emergency routes more and more, especially because this CrowdStrike outage. They're going to be like, what is our risk surface area? If we use this vendor and that vendor goes down, are we screwed? I think a lot of companies are going to start thinking that now just because of this one outage. It's going to be pretty present in people's minds. And the management process is going to have to change. You're going to have to create like your go bag of incident management when it's out of your control.
I remember doing these practices back when I was in school, which was a MIS degree with a CS minor. Was what I went to school for, which is, management information systems, which I probably haven't said that phrase since I graduated, but I remember them doing these practice routines, business continuity planning. I'm starting to remember the acronyms as well. Disaster recovery. Like you would actually write down what are all the things that could possibly go wrong, which is a fool's errand, by the way, but you'd still try. You do your best, right? There's the predict the future part.
Get close.
There's your predict the future part. And then you have to come up with a game plan for each of these situations. Like, how are we going to mitigate the impact? How are we going to continue to run our business? What are the workarounds? What are the next steps, etc.? And I did enjoy those processes, except for the writing part, of course, because I was in school. Nobody wants to write, but I thought it was very useful to think like, okay, what are kind of a list of things that are likely to happen?
Do you remember any of them?
A lot of them they're completely made up businesses, of course. So it's all kind of just arbitrary because we didn't actually have any businesses. And so we'd be like, you're the CTO of, X Corp that does Y thing. And now what could happen? And so you had to kind of like make up, here's our technology stack, here's what we're doing. And then if X, then Y. And no, I don't remember any of those particular details. But I did recently visit a nuclear power plant here in Nebraska. And the amount of things they've thought through and the amount of planning that they've done and building hedges, so to speak, around almost every possible thing that could go wrong at a power plant. It's laudable. It's amazing how thorough these folks have gone through and prepared for umpteen potential things. And it made me realize, like, oh, in software, we just kind of fly by the seat of our pants, don't we? Of course, they move way slower. I mean, that's the trade-off, right? Like, everything moves super slow at a nuclear power plant. It has to, because the consequences of disaster are so large. And maybe the fairy tale we've told ourselves, and maybe it's gotten less and less true over time, is like the consequence of software disasters isn't that big.
Well, we even had the phrases for it. I don't think we were pretending at all. What was it? Move fast and break things. How many times was that said in Silicon Valley?
Right.
That got abused, though. I mean, I think that at the time that began at Facebook, so that was a Facebook-born ideation. And I think it was a culture because they were in an innovation state. They were not I guess they were becoming more and more widely deployed, but they were also a web service. So it wasn't like, well, it's installed and it's going to crash something. So I think there's scenarios. Now, obviously, it's a social network, and there's a lot of people out there that are affected by, abuse, harm, et cetera, that can happen in social media, which I fully agree to. That's just how it kind of just sucks. And so the move fast and break things moniker to a lot of people is just like not a good thing, obviously. But to a technologist who's trying to innovate, that's a very admirable thing. Like, yeah, let's move fast and break things, because what happens is the iteration cycle to learning happens faster, right? This cycle you described with the sprinklers. Well, it doesn't happen over decades or regulated timeframes. It's minutes to hours to deployments. They could be hundreds in a day. And I think when you're in an innovation state like that, it is credible to pursue that kind of goal. But for everybody else to cargo cult that idea in places it doesn't apply is the danger zone, right? In places like CrowdStrike should not deploy this idea of move fast and break things. And maybe they did move fast and break things.
Well, it's interesting in that particular context because they are fighting adversaries who are also moving fast in order to break things. And so this goes back to the trade-offs that Robert was discussing. I mean, I can understand the ethos that said, we need a way to deploy to these machines outside of going through the entire process with Microsoft and the kernel stuff and the signing. We need a way to get our fixes out there before they attack all of our customers. That's what they're paying us for. And so I can see that trade-off of like, well, how can we do that? Well, let's develop a system where we're going to just sideload some rules and we'll try to make it innocuous, and we'll have, I'm sure there's CI/CD and there's test suites. I mean, this is a publicly traded company. I'm sure they have infrastructure around the code they're rolling out. I'm giving them too much credit. I don't think I am. I would be shocked if we learn that they didn't, like, this code went out when one person wrote it and nobody else looked at it. And, I doubt that's the case.
The anxiety of that code review, Jared.
Right.
A little throwback.
Yes. And so I can understand that push and pull. I mean, we have this even inside of like the App Store where it takes forever in software terms to roll out an app update. But if you have your logic server side and you can push even web components into a view, you can actually update your app throughout the day. You can basically do what they're doing with CrowdStrike, right? With Falcon.
But over-the-air updates are exactly what you're saying. Is
right.
Like Apple restricts them pretty heavily for their platform. But I like what you're saying, that CrowdStrike, this is an advantage. This is probably something they have bragged about in their sales cycle. Like, you don't ever need to do an update of this agent. It just will update itself. This is how I understand how it works. And when new vulnerabilities come out, like, we will cover you and protect you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge selling point. Why would you want to get rid of that?
Come on, Adam. Why would you want to get rid of that? Don't take it away from us.
No, I agree with that. I don't think. So the question comes back to, what can we do to learn from this? I've heard, did you mention this in news, Jared? I've read and listened to several things, eBPF, and how this could be the way the eBPF works. And I'm steeped in it to some degree, but also very beyond even novice. I'm just no, I'm a green person when it comes to what eBPF is and how to describe it. But from what I understand, this could be a different architecture that could prevent this?
Well, what's interesting is that CrowdStrike is actually using eBPF in their Linux client, is what I read from Brendan Gregg's article about eBPF. And so they're very well aware of it. It's a way to do this that's safer, and it's in development inside of Microsoft to provide eBPF support for Windows.
This was you then. Thank you. I love changelog news, by the way. Hey, y'all, listen to this. changelog.com/news. Subscribe today. If you're not, you're just missing out.
You're missing out. So Brendan Gregg has this post, which was in Changelog News, called No More Blue Fridays. And it's his writing of why eBPF will be potentially another tool in our toolbox, right? In order to achieve what they're trying to achieve without some of the dangers latent in the current Windows-based rollout. However, the in-development version of eBPF will not have all the features it has in Linux. And so could CrowdStrike immediately use it in order to replace their current rollout? Survey says probably not. Like it's going to be, it has to be much more full-featured in order for that to be like a thing they could start using as soon as it's shipped. But it's a direction.
Well, what better way to get R&D budget to make that go faster than what just happened, right? You know.
Well, there you go. That was kind of Brendan Gregg's point at the end. And of course, he's, I think he has a dog in the hunt. He's very much invested in eBPF, which is open source and all that, but there's businesses built around it. But he said like, hey, here's a great moment. If you are paying for computer security software and you are a paid customer of these entities, you could push them to make this eBPF path happen faster and better because, you're their customer. So he's that was his call to action at the end of that post.
And what would happen is at the kernel level, do you know much about this to describe what would happen in this, if this hypothesized world existed, this future development, how it would work to prevent this kernel from crashing the system or booting without it or being more safer?
No.
Okay. Well, that's what I was thinking of, is like, how can we, I guess, and I'm not a Windows developer, so by all means, just like slap me in the face after this one, but I'm just thinking like, you have a crash dump whenever the blue screen of death comes up. And the system knows probably what crashed it, at least if it's a driver in kernel mode, what's crashing it. Could you not just offer the user the option to boot sans that third-party, especially if it's third-party software, temporarily? Now, I get that this is cybersecurity.
What do you mean?
Software. Well, I'm just thinking if the kernel driver of CrowdStrike, a third-party, not a first-party, native operating system kernel driver, is crashing the system. So it, by moniker, it's a third party. Could you not say, well, this system knows that this third-party driver is crashing the system. Do you want to boot without it? And maybe that's what safe mode does. But I mean, why couldn't that be a non-safe mode thing? I don't know. Because maybe those systems could have just been booted by everyday people. It's about UX and user friendliness. Now, I don't know if that's secure. Robert's shaking his head a little bit.
Are you saying the system knows that the system is crashing?
It's like a layer. It's a layer on a layer, right?
You're throwing another layer that doesn't currently exist in there. Is that what you're saying, Robert?
I think. I mean, I'm not even going to try to pretend I know how these, kernel I'm going to call it an add-on. See, like that's how inexperienced I am with it. Like plugins. I don't want to pretend to know, but yeah. I think that what Adam is saying, I think the challenge with that is just more complexity. Mm-hmm. And, is the risk worth the reward? And, can the system, think about the amount of trial and error you would have to go through for that to work really well. And where does the operating system even store that knowledge that plugin is borked, right? You're at the point of it booted.
That's my point, is like it's crashing currently.
You might not even have file system access yet. Like that's how early in the ones and zeros we are. So I think that's the challenge, is you got to put it somewhere.
So let's zoom back out one layer then. My thought is not literally how we deploy the fix, like literally this is how we solve it. But from a user experience standpoint, the reason why the outage perpetuated to its length was because everyday people could not solve their own problem with the system. And I'm just suggesting, is there a path where you can provide everyday users of their computer some version of bypassing this crash? That's all. And I don't know that answer. I'm just hypothesizing that the reason why it perpetuated was because people who, like IT, basically, people smarter than the end user from a technical level, in most cases, standpoint, could not solve. They had to come in and be deployed to literally open up the laptop, or could you imagine trucking in a workstation? Like, not everybody uses laptops these days. Some people use workstations, but like, you had to take the thing in to the people. They had to plug a monitor into it and a keyboard into it, and somebody else had to touch it. I'm just thinking, is there an other way where the end user could have done more of this in line too, rather than simply waiting?
I don't think Nick Burns wants the end user to do it.
No?
Well, I remember the days of Windows. Remember the days of Windows where it was remote PCs, and the only thing that station was responsible for was basically connecting to something else that was doing the compute.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that comes back, right? I mean, maybe that's a world that
client-side computing was thin clients. That was a Citrix, and that's my roots, man. I grew up in IT in the early 2000s. Worked at an IT company that deployed Citrix and VMware intensely. We had our own co-location system at a data center. You were talking about the power plant, Jared. Data centers are similarly, if not equally, thought through.
Not equally. Not equally.
Yeah, I'm going to say maybe not all the way.
Nuclear power plants are so regulated.
Well, that's why I said similarly, if not equally. There's a version of the thoughtfulness, let's just say.
I'm going to say I hope they're not. I hope that nuclear power plants have more thought.
Okay, I will give you that.
I came out feeling much safer about nuclear power through this tour because of how stinking serious they are about safety. But anyways.
Yeah. Well, just the point was that I agree, Robert. Maybe thin clients or remote. I mean, but
what's old is new again. Maybe, I think.
Well, isn't that what the web is? Jared was talking about that. It's like a widely deployed operating system. Most of us are on web apps these days anyways. Most of what we do is through the browser. Like right now, we're having this discussion through the browser. Video, audio, recorded locally, streamed back up. In most cases, doesn't fail. Really good software, but it's web software. We have to use a special browser, which is a whole different fight.
Web software goes down. I'm just not sure exactly what we're solving with this moving the furniture around.
So what I had in my head is I saw a picture through all the news cycles of this CrowdStrike outage. It was a gate agent's computer. It was at the gate where you board the plane, and it had the blue screen of death. And in that situation, does that computer need a CrowdStrike kernel agent running on it? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I think where I'm going with this is, does that computer just need a screen, a mouse, and a keyboard that's hooked up to something else down the hallway? That's one station that's powering 20 gates, and it's much easier. It's smaller surface area. I think we're getting to that point. Like, networks are getting fast enough to do that type of thing. Maybe it's too far. I'm not sure, honestly. I mean, some companies have tried to do this with like gaming, for example. I don't remember if
they've all failed so far.
It failed so fast.
Yeah.
But maybe that was too far, right? Like, that's hard to do. That's like, you need super low latency video feeds, all that.
And it was Google trying to do it. It wasn't some fly by night. I mean, they have the resources. If anybody could accomplish it, you'd think Google.
Yeah. And Microsoft Xbox was trying to do it too. I forget the name. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
But maybe it's like that type of world, right? Where it's just a keyboard, a mouse, and a screen, and it's hooked up somewhere else. Maybe that's the world we go to. You reduce the surface area, therefore you reduce the amount of potential outage.
I think in this case, that hypothesis has merit only because we know what we know. It's not because we know what we knew or know what we know prior to, and that's the plan. Because I think even in that scenario, you have now a single machine dependency of many dependencies. And now it's like, well, when that one machine is down, it's not just one person. The outage affects many because of the design of, dependency. I am pro thin client though. I'm pro what Citrix did back in those days. It was a very cool thing. I mean,
I hated it.
Well, so for certain workers, for certain tasks, it was perfect. I hated it too, Jared, because
Why were you for it then?
Well, in my scenario, I was for it for everybody else though. So in my case,
for everybody else.
Oh yeah.
I'm for it for everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cool tech. The ergonomics of it were terrible.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. The tech was cool. And for certain scenarios, I helped out. I ran network administration for a company that had that did commodity training. And so they had machines in silos, grain silos. And those places are dirty, nasty, corn, chaff, etc. Like, it's not the place where you're going to have a server farm. Or you wouldn't even want a PC because eventually that tower is going to get all kinds of stuff into it. It's going to break down. And so in those cases, like the thinnest client possible with a Citrix connection was the answer. It made tons of sense.
Yeah.
But in many other use cases, you got your employees sitting in their office and they're Citrixing into somewhere else, to run with this latency, and it was slow and they didn't have access to local resources. In those contexts, I was like, this is ridiculous. I have a beefy computer sitting here. It's connected to a remote machine.
The grain silo didn't have a good internet connection. So,
well, that was another problem. We had to create, a lot of times we had to create internet connection for them in order for them to actually connect back to Citrix. And so that was, you're trying to do remote computing in a grain silo. It's not going to be easy no matter how you do it.
right.
What's up, friends? I'm here with Faraz Abugadije, founder and CEO of Socket. Socket helps to protect the best engineering teams out there with their developer-first security platform. And so, Faraz, speaking of developer-first, Socket is developer-first. What does that mean? What do you mean by being developer-first?
Most security software is typically sold to executives, so it tends to suck to actually use it. So the company, the vendor goes in and makes a sale, the executive thinks it looks good, but they don't actually care at all what the developer experience is of the tool. So I think that's where I would start. The first problem with security tools is they're sold to executives. In the best case, those tools get purchased and they just sit around on the shelf, bothering nobody and protecting nobody. But in the worst case, they get rolled out and they prevent developers from getting things done. And they just get all up in your face with alerts and pointless noise that isn't actionable. And if you actually go and fix those alerts, you're not even improving security, because a lot of the time those vulnerabilities are super low impact. That's like the dirty secret of vulnerabilities, is most of them are low impact. They're either in dev dependencies, so they're never going to run in production, or they're really difficult to exploit. Or if you exploit them, there's nothing really there. It's like a denial of service in some random component. And in reality, like, that's just such a low risk in terms of just your priorities of things you need to work on as a developer. I would actually say probably 90 or 95% of the vulnerability alerts that developers are used to seeing from other tools are just completely pointless. They're just fake work. And fixing them doesn't even meaningfully improve security at all.
Well, there you have it. Protect yourself, your team, and your software from the threats that really matter. Don't do fake work. Use Socket. Socket.dev. Book a demo. Install the GitHub app. Install the Socket CLI. Whatever it takes to take the next step, do it. Go to socket.dev. Again, socket.dev. Well, Intel Innovation 2024, Accelerate the Future, is right around the corner. It takes place September 24th and 25th in San Jose, California. This event is all about you, the developer, the community, and the critical role you play in tackling the toughest challenges across the industry. Ignite your passion for AI and beyond, grow your skills to maximize your impact, and network with your peers as they unleash the next wave of advancements in technology. Understand the emerging innovation and trends in dev tools, languages, frameworks, and technologies in AI and beyond. Join on-site hands-on labs, workshops, meetups, and hackathons to collaborate and solve real problems in real time. Collab with experts, learn and have fun, engage in interactive sessions, connect, grow your network, gain a unique idea and perspective, and build lasting networks, and of course, have fun. You'll hear from leading experts in the industry, technologists, startup entrepreneurs, and fellow developers, along with Intel leadership CEO Pat Gelsinger and CTO Greg Lavender, as they take you through the latest advancements in technology. Don't miss out on the chance to be at the forefront of innovation. Take advantage of their early bird pricing from now until August 2nd. Register using the link in the show notes, or to learn more, go to intel.com/innovation. When you're at scale, like CrowdStrike was, and you deploy bad code, regardless of which theory you go with, bad code, done on purpose, rogue, whatever, there's people saying like this was planned.
I haven't read any of that stuff, but I'm sure it's out there.
Well, anytime something like this happens at a scale like this, you got to wonder, like, we live in a simulation lately. Like, there is strange things happening every single day that has been basically unprecedented every single day. So like the new precedent is unprecedented,
Right.
And I don't want to hypothesize here because that's not what we're trying to do or not what I'm trying to do. But when you're at scale like this, it's obviously an attack surface of some sort, whether it's bad code, an incident, or just simply, a bad day, a bad Friday, a bad weekend. And how can we give CrowdStrike the ability to do what they want to do and have the sales pitch they want to have without having the opportunity for outage like this? And then all the others, they're going to fall in their footsteps. Who else? What other software will be at scale and be attack surface, whether it's bad code, planned, intended, rogue, whatever. They're all similar scenarios, just a matter of how the incident percolates.
I mean, there's just the surface area of which software can be impacted now, either just through sheer outage or security, is staggering. I mean, there was, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, it was newsworthy enough for the New York Times. I saw the word Postgres on the front page of the New York Times. I was like, what is this? And you go and read it, and it all boils down to there was a state actor that gained the trust of the core team for Postgres, and they started submitting patches that fixed real things. And then they submitted something that was very subtle that was caught on accident by another engineer years later. And they eventually figured it out. They were like, holy crap, this person just gained our trust by submitting real stuff and then snuck something in. And how do you defend that? you just can't. I don't think you can.
That sounds a lot like the XZ thing. Is this in addition to that?
I think that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I couldn't remember the exact name of it, but
yeah. So I don't remember the Postgres part, but certainly this XZ backdoor was placed by a state actor.
I think it was someone working on Postgres. And then they got down to that level. Maybe that's how
Gotcha.
I misremembered it. Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, XZ is a dependency of many software packages and was close to being actually distributed via apt and other package registries prior to it getting found out on accident by a developer. So yeah, crazy times for sure. Definitely not tinfoil hat, Adam, to say, to ask the question of, was this mere incompetence or was this actually an attack? Because attacks happen and they are happening and they will continue to.
Yeah.
And so those questions do have to be asked. I think in this particular case, I jumped immediately to incompetence, Occam's razor style, because I know how complex software systems are to roll out updates. I was like, oh gosh, somebody had a really bad day, but that could be a wrong conclusion to jump to.
Well, I think in the case that you're talking about, Robert, with Postgres, if this is accurate, is code analysis, right? You have to analyze, especially in open source. But when it's closed source, like CrowdStrike and a definition update, all you can do is rely upon that team, that company to be mature enough to have protections in place, right? When it's proprietary closed source, there's nothing you can do from a scale point to analyze the code. From a different route with open source, you could do a lot of things. You could pay attention to where the patches are coming from. I guess in this case here, if the patch was, hey, Robert, here's the patch. I'm Adam. Let's just say it's you as the core committer and I'm the friend who's trying to be friendly. I've solved this problem. Here you go, Robert. And you just take my code and maybe you actually deploy it to Postgres. So it's coming in signed. Maybe that's an example where you really can't analyze very well. But if you had to, say Robert is signing this commit, but it's being the location or the source of the commit is from an outside source helping out because it's open source, then you could at least have a waypoint to begin to track if you're doing code analysis. I think that's the area where I'm really confident and looking forward to more and more being done, because when you can analyze the Git repository and the graph of things happening in a code base, there's a lot you can pull out when it's like, okay, that's a smell. You got a brand new committer. You got somebody being nurtured or whatever you want to call it to kind of get their trust over multiple years even. Like there's layers of anomaly that can be, identified because of the way open source works if you do specific code analysis. So that's where I'm hopeful.
Well, I'm hopeful that we can keep open source going the way it is for longer. I do think that some of these risks that are coming up with state actors infiltrating through years of building trust and accidental attack vectors coming through, like over time, I think that people are going to start to get skeptical.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a tough moment. We're going to have to kind of start thinking about that. I'm starting to hear more and more about people like don't want to use third-party libraries for common things just because of the risk. For example, like attacking a JavaScript NPM package that's widely used. That does a pretty simple thing. Candidly, it's less risky to just do it yourself sometimes. And like that's a calculus that companies are going to have to start thinking about.
Yes. I mean, I think every developer should make that calculation every time they're going to pull in a dependency. And I'm not saying don't pull the dependency in, but I think you do have to think through that. And I think we're learning that, and hopefully our collective immune system will react. I do think that these state actors being outed every once in a while, at least, will boost our immune system as open source maintainers to be like, let's kind of be a little more leery of the contributors who are coming around, and like just, that whole kumbaya, open, we're all friends worldwide thing that was going on when open source began is like, it's
gone.
It's just not the same world anymore.
Yep.
And so maybe we won't be fooled next time, hopefully, by somebody who's trying to butter us up in order to take advantage of us.
Do you think there's a way to like label software at scale, like an XZ?
What do you mean?
Like if you're a contributor to XZ, do you know how much it's deployed and you understand how crucial your core role is to that software?
Yes and no.
Yes and no, right?
Yeah,
so
probably hard to feel the actual gravity of it.
Right. I'm just wondering, is there a way to, and I'm literally asking the question without having put any thought into it. So if it's naive, slide me around if you have to.
As we do.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if is there a way to elevate certain software without, maybe even by analysis, to understand its deployment or its dependency levelness, I suppose, its scale. Like I'm sure CrowdStrike knew how at scale they were. This was not unknown to them. So this is not an example. But XZ and the folks behind that who were being, groomed, for lack of better terms, over a year or more, a very long, patient amount of time, do they understand how crucial the software is that they're in control of so that they can have that position you just said, which is, hey, pay attention to strange incoming behaviors that is trying to get into your code base. Like, I just don't know if like everybody who's in the open source world, they may care, but do they know how crucial their software is? I don't even know if that's like a good question, but I'm just thinking like, is there a way to like label something? Hey, you're a scaled software, you're widely deployed, and there's some way to elevate them to a different level, at least by label, so that there's like an awareness that if there's a malicious attack on that code base, it has effects.
I feel like GitHub could own that, honestly. I mean, they know how many times a repository is committed. They know how many times it's even looked at, just page views in general.
Yeah.
They know the number of stars on it. Like, and maybe it's not GitHub. Maybe it's some other program. Maybe it's government sponsored that goes to these maintainers and says, just FYI, like you're on our list.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You just made the list.
Yeah. And it's, in a way, it's like, congratulations, you've built such valuable software. It's now a national security threat. But, I hear what you're saying. I think it's hard. Because it takes the steam out of it. It takes the altruism out of it sometimes too, for some people that just like want to do a good thing. When the barrier is high, then people won't do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's challenging.
I think the maintainers of scaled software know. I think that they're just wildly under-resourced and exhausted and can't possibly sometimes care enough anymore because they've cared so much for so long, for so little. So I think for the rest of us, I did not know how big XZ was in terms of its dependency graph, the other way around, how many dependency graphs it was in, which was many. but I'm sure that the author of XC has an idea. Like, that's why I said yes and no. He may not know exactly how big his software is, but at a certain point, when your package is deployed across all these distributions and stuff, yeah, you understand that, like, wow, this thing is really reaching lots of places. And so I think there's some of that gravity there. But for the rest of us, that might be useful to have that list of softwares that are considered security or national security importance or whatever it is. Like, they aren't the threat, but they are of potential, threat because of their situation.
Well, I think one example of a developer who just built an open source something and took it down, not realizing the true scale of this thing, was LeftPad.
Oh yeah,
2016. That one was wild.
Yeah, it was.
So many packages couldn't be installed, and deploys like stopped for hours because of that. And it was just I forget the exact context, but I think it was like some dispute, and he was like, I'm going to take down the package you're using.
Wasn't it political?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it was.
I don't think LeftPad was political. LeftPad was a long time ago. There was a political one.
Yeah.
Just deleted it off of NPM
Yep.
package registry, and then chaos ensued.
I think LeftPad might have been the one where they had another package called Kick or Sidekick, and another company, not another company. This might not be LeftPad either. But this definitely happened. There's a company, a startup called Kick, K-I-K, I believe.
Yes.
And there's a package called Kick, I think owned by the LeftPad owner, if it's coming back to me.
Oh, yeah.
And the Kick company contacted NPM and wanted the name, but didn't have the package name. And I think NPM granted them access to the Kick package name, basically kicking it off the LeftPad owner. And then they got mad and just pulled LeftPad and all their stuff. I think they pulled all their stuff. I'm pretty sure that's LeftPad. That may be a different one because there's been so many at this point, but that definitely happened.
There's a Wikipedia page for it.
Is there?
NPM LeftPad incident that I just found. And yeah, you're right on the money with what you just said. But you know what's kind of crazy about that? And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about own your software a little bit more. LeftPad was not a thing that needed to go out over a network and download a package and pull it down. Like, any engineer should be able to write what LeftPad did.
Absolutely. Or copy paste the function. It was like
that. Yeah.
Because you can use somebody else's code with a little copy paste and remove that dependency. And not because you can't trust the author, but because we cannot trust the network, right? That's the problem with NPM. We can trust the authors in most cases, but we cannot trust the network into the future. You can maybe trust it today, but you cannot trust the network tomorrow. And so copy paste that sucker, vendor it. I mean, that's what we used to call it in the Ruby world, vendor it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is to pull it into your repo, check it in, and leave it there.
I remember doing that. Did you see that one? It was a couple weeks ago that a domain expired.
Yeah.
That was hosting a JavaScript package.
Polyfill.
And someone else bought the domain, put something not good there.
Not good.
Same domain path, and all these websites that were resolving that domain to the new source were impacted. It was like 100,000 websites.
You can't trust the network.
Yeah, so that's a good way you can't trust the network.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good way.
Especially over time.
Yeah.
Because that's what we think of today, but over time, the network changes
Mm-hmm.
in ways that we wouldn't expect. Like, nobody expected polyfill.io to change ownership, or CDN, whatever the CDN that was hosting polyfill.io.
Right.
We put some stuff through proxy, basically. And that kind of does
You proxy it yourselves and let it.
And the gems and some stuff. And that way it's kind of if it's there, we trust it kind of thing.
Right.
And if you try to pull something else in a bundle install, yarn install, whatever it is, go get, it goes through there. And if it's not there, then it kind of triggers why are you trying to get something that isn't in this? It's not blessed yet.
And this is a proxy that you guys run.
Yes.
Is this like a Artifactory kind of thing where you pull?
Yeah,
Is it like that?
some other, I forget the exact tech if I'm honest, but yeah, but similar to the JFactory or
Right.
JFrog Artifactory. Yeah.
JFrog.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Just get yourself layers in between you and the unknown. I mean, that's other wise practices for sure.
Well, that's like rich man's version or rich person's version of vendoring. It's like the same idea, except for it's
Yeah, you vendor it to a server.
it's vendoring. I mean, this has been a tale as old as time, basically. Ruby had it first.
Well, like I said, what's old is new again.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
We're going to go back to all these ideas in some way, shape, or form, I think.
Well, we're going back to thin clients apparently. So
Well, I mean, I think even that too, you have to have an incident like this, to have a discussion like this that says these older ideas that were probably pretty good, maybe at the time it was like less modern to do it. Now it's more modern. So maybe but I suppose to your point, Jared, with your meme, like I deployed software today, so it's modern, right? Like what didn't you have a meme out there somewhere that's
yeah. Just mostly a gripe. Like people always advertise their software as modern, which just literally means that it's just a newer thing, Like it's not a feature. It's just that you started coding it 6 months ago.
Right.
At some point, someone's going to start bragging about how much their software hasn't changed.
Yeah, I think vintage software should make a move,
Yeah.
This is classic. This is vintage.
When I was young gun engineer and I heard about these banks using like Cobalt still, and I was like, what losers.
Right.
And now I'm like, hey, whatever. It works. I can look at my balances and I've never had an issue and I can always charge my card. You do you. Right. Like maybe calcified software has a purpose in the world where it just gets rarely touched and we're just happy about that.
Yeah.
I'm leaning that way more and more. Do we need to keep changing the software? I don't know.
That's not really good for your business though, Robert. I mean, if you advocate for that.
Robert's out there. More incidents. We need more incidents.
My investors, my board hears that. They'll be like, what are you doing?
What are you saying,
Stop.
Robert?
Stop right now.
Well, I think even if you have unchanged software, there's still bound to be incidents of some sort. I mean, there's still going to be, no one's going to listen to you, Robert. No one's going to do that, right?
I recommend that.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun digging into the details, I think. It's fun to speculate out. I do want to, again, mention, I love Dave Plummer and his channel on YouTube. He's a great resource. I always appreciate what he shares. I probably listened to his video twice, just making sure I kind of understood some of the mechanics behind it, because I really want to understand, like, to what degree does this software actually operate on Windows? And I thought that was pretty fascinating to kind of understand WHQL, the protections and signing in place they have for it, and really, how this incident propagated. We don't know if it was really bad code or if it was sabotage or if it was some sort of plan. That's all speculation that we're not trying to really go through here, but sort of like, hey, if you're out there and you've been affected by this or you're just curious, go out there and do your own investigations, pay attention to what's happening out there. And I guess we can look forward to George Kurtz, the current CEO of CrowdStrike, who was there at the helm during this incident, to stand before Congress and explain exactly what happened. And maybe then we'll know.
Talking about security theater.
Right. Until then, all we could do is speculate what may have happened. We can, use they're not called dumps. What are they called? Are they called dumps whenever it's a kernel panic?
Well, you dump the stack.
Yeah. It's not a stack trace, because that's like an application kind of thing. It's something.
Kernel panic.
Yeah, exactly. You can examine that, and there's lots of folks. There was a famous tweet out there that made the rounds explaining that this one file was updated, and while it should have had the needed definition in there, instead it just contains zeros because of a null pointer. There's all these things of like why this actually happened. But I think in the end, we could just say at scale, software can have massive effects, and we got to do something about that. It's a good thing to have scale software, but at the same time, we have to do updates responsibly. Or in this scenario where you have a kernel level driver, how do you do what CrowdStrike wants to do with Falcon, but not bypass the security systems? That's the real question here, specifically for this incident. I think for others is just love your maintainers if it's open source. If it's not open source, drag them through Congress and make them explain it. And slap them around a little bit. Otherwise, just do what you can to stay safe. Scrutinize your dependencies, your third parties, etc. And that's about it for me.
And run Linux on your desktop. I mean, that's the way. This is the way. Write Rust, run Linux, and you'll be good to go. And then let all of us know about it.
Yeah, once they figure out their audio drivers to come on this show, it'll be great to hear their experience.
Well, every time we have a Linux user, we're always happy, obviously, and then sad because we expect to have some version of issue because of drivers. It's almost unanimous.
Well, thanks so much for having me. This was a blast. I think it was a fun topic to talk about and it's super interesting.
For sure. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Robert. It's been fun. Bye, friends.
All right. Bye, friends. Well, friends, here we are again at the end of a busy and interesting week in the software world, which more and more is the whole world. Do you have thoughts? Do you have opinions? I know you do. We would love to hear them. Sound off in the comments, link in the show notes. Oh, and stick around, Changelog++ members. This is yet another extended episode. We love doing these for our most loyal supporters. Oh, and by the way, if you are a Changelog++ member, maybe sign in to changelog.com using your ++ email address and see if you see anything new on your homepage. I won't say more than that for now, but we'll talk details soon enough, probably on the next Kaizen. Okay, quick thanks again to our partners at Fly.io, to Breakmaster Cylinder, to Sentry, use code changelog, and to you, of course, for listening along. Seriously, we appreciate it. Next week on the Changelog, news on Monday, Joseph Jacks from OSS Capital on Wednesday, and Adam is flying solo on Friday, but he has a very special guest, the author of his favorite book series, The Bobaverse. Yes, Dennis E. Taylor joins the show. Have a great weekend. Leave us a 5-star review if you dig our work. And let's talk again real soon.
So during the main show, I did not ask you about this, nor did we directly reference it, but it was a reference point for me. You wrote something the same day as this incident, I think, is July 19th, 2024, Beyond the Headlines, the unsung art of software outage management. And rather than...
It's better.